In the early 2000s, the entire world would tune into Memphis, Tennessee, to witness an event very few thought possible. A heavyweight championship fight between Lennox the Lion Lewis and Iron Mike Tyson. In an event that would rival the buildup and tension of heavyweight's golden era, the Rumble on the River would help define the legacy of the two titans of boxing. If you bought into the media frenzy, public perception, and promotional materials, this wasn't simply a battle between champion and challenger. To many, Lewis wasn't only defending his titles, he was defending the reputation of boxing itself.
Who am keeping it down, not out of respect for the media. I don't want Tyson to kick my ass for disturbing his workout.
Because at this time, the sport had a major PR problem, and his name was Mike Tyson.
I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lennox is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from Nairclaw. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
In fact, after a press conference brawl that had left the WBC president unconscious and a dental impression on Lennox Lewis's thigh, promoters had to reschedule the fight and move it to a state that hadn't revoked Tyson's boxing license. But as dark as Tyson's personal life became at that time, he never stopped caring about the heart of boxing or his own legacy. He wished to once again prove that he was the baddest man on the planet, and if he won, the only heavyweight to win a world title in 3 separate decades. A baptism through victory. For the great Lennox Lewis, the chess-playing heavyweight, beating Tyson wasn't about proving who was the best heavyweight in the world. In his mind, he had already done that several times over. Heading into this record-breaking pay-per-view headliner, Lewis was a 3-time world champion, 2-time lineal champion, and the undisputed heavyweight champion. But he still needed to discipline boxing's bad boy. And while the odds makers had Lewis as a 2-to-1 favorite, his only 2 losses had come via one-punch KO, something Tyson was still well capable of, especially during the first few rounds. While Tyson no longer exemplified a textbook PeekABoo style, he wasn't too far off of his signature form. Tyson was an aggressive counterpuncher who forced opponents to the ropes with intense, immediate pressure. As the opponent punched out for space and respect, Tyson avoided the incoming leather with odd-angled head movement that flowed into his offense. Because of his square stance and forward-facing style, Tyson could cover a ton of space while slipping and dipping far to either side, exploding from a crouched position to whip an opponent's chin around like an owl. The square stance also maximized power for a puncher like Tyson because it meant he could move his weight to either side, supported by quick angular shifts and momentary flashes into southpaw from orthodox. In other words, if this was chess, his footwork offered the versatility of the queen, able to move and attack from almost every angle. And against the 6'5", 250-pound chess-playing heavyweight, who built on small advantages like Petrosian, Tyson would need every advantage he could get. Because Lennox Lewis wasn't your typical big man in the heavyweight division. While others who possessed his size may have relied on power and athleticism alone, Lewis was a refined boxer puncher, whose outside style revolved around an incredibly versatile jab. His most common lead hand attack was a stiff rising jab that cut up from underneath an opponent's guard. But he also threw a swatting jab that could rip away an opponent's gloves just long enough to slip in some damage. He also had a looping jab that looked something like a lead arm straight hook. While each weapon was effective on its own, Lewis could effortlessly flow from one type to the other, even changing the direction of his glove mid-punch as a sort of directional feint. But while Lewis preferred to box from long range, he wasn't afraid to dive in and get dirty if he smelled blood in the water. Lewis was no stranger to roughhouse tactics. He would lean on and bully shorter fighters, using every legal advantage that he could. But even with all these factors stacked against him, Tyson's ferocity, experience, and unpredictability caused many to bet the house on a 2-1 underdog win. The night arrived, and the tension was as thick as a cement brick. Not wanting a repeat of January's press conference brawl, Tyson and Lewis were kept as far apart as possible for the entirety of the fight week. They weighed in 3 hours apart, stayed in homes that were 20 miles apart, and on fight night, the two fighters emerged from their locker rooms that were placed as far apart as the building's blueprints would allow. With riot shields under the ring, both fighters would be escorted by armed police. Now, each man stood opposite the battle line, staring across the ring, eager to capture their place in the canon of heavyweight fighting. There would be no center ring stare down, no glove touch. Like a gladiator death match, there was no room for civility here. After all the buildup, all the bad blood, and all the tension, finally, the bell rang. Both men charged to center ring, but while Lewis had the far greater reach, Tyson was finding success with his jab, mostly due to his wide and low head movement. Like a shark dipping below water, his punches came from unseen depths, catching Lewis by surprise, one sending the towering champion stumbling towards the ropes. But of course, Mike Tyson wasn't content with jabs alone. He charged in with vicious intent, trying to topple his opponent with every single shot. But the larger man would not be bullied. Lewis shot a whistling uppercut on the retreat and started roughing up Tyson as soon as his back hit the post, leaning on the shorter fighter and framing to create some space and return fire. While Tyson was nearly doubled over, Lewis slipped a bone-rattling left hook behind his glove, then pelted his guard with uppercuts. The fighters fell into a clinch, and referee Eddie Cotton sprinted to separate the two, perhaps trying to minimize the risk of Tyson's cannibalistic instincts. Tyson was undeterred. In the final minute of the round, Tyson slipped to the outside of Lewis's left jab and leaped forward with a thudding left hook, catching the champion square on the chin. However, other than a slight stumble, Lewis's jaw proved solid. For now. If the first round was intense, the second was frustrating for both men. While Tyson was still dipping below the jab, he wasn't as able to capitalize on his way back up. Lewis stayed long and parried Tyson's jabs from the outside. And when Tyson decided to dive in with heated leather, Lewis would smother his work like sand on an open flame. Using overhooks and collar ties, Lewis would stunt Tyson's offense by leaning on him. But it wasn't all coming together for Lewis either. While his jab was becoming a larger factor, he was still struggling to catch Tyson clean. So while Tyson wasn't finding the mark with his offense, he was still able to stay defensive with his dynamic head movement. A perfect example was Lewis's ripping rear uppercut, a tool ready-made for a forward-facing, shorter opponent, especially for a bulldozing fighter that came in head low like Tyson. Despite this, Tyson's twisting, tilting body movement placed his head too far off the center line for the uppercut to ever land flush, so round 3 was all about the war of the jabs once again. Both men landing, sometimes at the same time. Lewis's busier offbeat jabs now had a presence, but Tyson's were still hitting harder. Then, with 50 seconds left in the round, Tyson finally landed a massive left hook. Lucky for Lewis, he was able to ride away from the follow-up hook, keeping his composure and consciousness safe for the rest of the round. Round 4 opened with what turned out to be a critical exchange. As Tyson waded in, Lewis used one of his tricky jabs, turning it from a pawing lead to a stiff check hook. And although it didn't seem like much, this strategy from here on out would stop Tyson's inside dipping jab setup cold. This shut down Tyson's favorite way to set up his jab and his hook. When Tyson tried to enter with an inside slip, he would instead run right into Lewis's knuckles. Unfortunately for Mike, he wasn't nearly as effective with the outside slip jab. Lewis had already halted his progress there as well, using frames and tie-ups to stop him cold, and following up with short, tight shots from there. With Tyson's jab essentially gone, Lewis could finally display the full power of his own jab. With each passing exchange, Lewis's barrel of a straight right was inching closer and closer to its target. With less than 20 seconds left in the round, Lewis sailed a right straight through Tyson's guard with crushing force. The heavyweight menace seemed to buckle, and Lewis helped by leaning hard on the back of his neck. As Tyson fell to the canvas, Lewis gave a parting shot to his vulnerable ribs. Mike looked up, seeming unsure of what happened. The referee ruled it a slip and deducted a point from Lewis, Ironically, if Lewis hadn't continued his roughhousing ways, he may have knocked Tyson out with follow-up damage. Instead, he was leaving the round 1 point short. In Lewis's corner, the legendary trainer Emmanuel Stewart was incensed. Screaming at Lewis and slapping his chest, Stewart scolded his fighter for letting Tyson off the hook and not chasing a finish, ending the break with the shout of "Set it up, the man is finished!" In the fifth, Lewis finally unleashed the full power of his extraordinary jab, and it completely and totally dismantled Tyson's PeekABoo head movement, turning the monster of heavyweight folklore into a clumsy apparition of his former self. Lewis kept his jabs half extended, and though it limited his potential power, it also shortened the time it took to travel.
Actually, I've actually moved you closer to the target.
Right.
So you're closer to the target now, so it has a shorter distance to go.
This let Lewis pump out jabs like an annoying cloud of angry gnats. This piled up damage, but more importantly, it disrupted Tyson's timing, halting him midway through all of his movements and setups. But this still wouldn't have been possible without the many varied angles of Lewis's jab. Each time Tyson dipped down, he found a glove rising to meet him. Each time he ducked inside, a looping jab would find his temple. Each time he ducked outside, a backhand would knife across. Moving into the 6th round, this trend would not only continue, but compound. Lewis's uppercut, which had only skimmed and nipped at Tyson until now, also started to cause some serious damage. Now Lewis started building off of his jab, finally unleashing his tremendous power shots. Even as Lewis landed another crunching right hand, this one wicking the sweat from Tyson's head, Tyson almost landed an immediate follow-up hook. Tyson was always dangerous, but Lewis was done with caution. In the 7th, he stood toe-to-toe, planting his feet to deliver a torrential downpour of heavy leather. The increase in volume paid off, because even if Tyson skillfully evaded 1 or 2 punches, Lewis could usually land the 3rd or 4th. The whole trick to Tyson's head movement was that it threatened tremendous counters. But with Lewis's ability to punish and stifle the PeekABoo head movement, the threat was gone. So the assassin stood tall, sat back, and comfortably picked his shots as they came. Sensing the fight slipping away, Tyson charged out in the 8th. If this was his final stand, he would make it count. Relying on a puncher's chance, he did all he could to stack the odds in his favor. But Lewis kept sailing back to safety, keeping his chin far away from the desperate haymakers of his staggering opponent, until he finally decided to take one of Tyson's invitations. His first counter uppercut missed, but a quick tie set up a second off the lead hand. Tyson's head whipped back, his knees buckled, and he nearly sank to the canvas. While the standing 8 count rule was not in effect, the ref mercifully called one anyways. But all it did was delay the inevitable. Lewis continued his onslaught, lighting up Tyson with stabbing jabs and hooking shots that came from all angles. Tyson held on the best he could, not willing to go down without a fight. But after asserting insane pressure with long, punishing combinations, Lewis finally delivered a checkmate, timing Tyson's slip to intercept with a crippling right hand. Lennox Lewis had conquered boxing's most feared heavyweight, banishing him to the depths of the blue canvas. Lewis had fought the perfect fight. While Tyson's style and coaching had certainly changed, and few believed for the better, that's not the lesson or the takeaway here. It was Lewis's ingenious strategy and cunning execution that proved too much for the PeekABoo style. Mike Tyson once said that boxing is a thinking man's game, and as such, this fight is a testament to both Emmanuel Stewart and certainly the fearsome lion, the great, the legendary Lennox Lewis. If you'd like to learn more about the sweet science yourself, you can check out my books on power, defense, and footwork, linked below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.